Hello, everybody. Guess what? We're live again. The Journey podcast is live, and I'm here talking again from Manchester, the cross between Jason Manford and Noel Gallagher, basically. So it's great to be live again, and we're going to be talking today about PR, proportional representation. That's thrown you, hasn't it, Fiona? Of course, we're not talking about proportional representation. We're actually talking about PR, public relations. Now, this is an area that I'm really interested in and fascinated in. I'm not in it as a business, but I'm always interested and intrigued the way it operates, etc. So I'm going to be chatting to Fiona about PR, and I'll probably ask her about the state of journalism, which she's not expecting either. As you probably know by now, we don't actually... in fact, this is the first time Fiona and I have ever actually spoken. I know of Fiona, but I don't know Fiona. And that's social media for you, and that's the modern age of the internet. But having said that, I certainly know her expertise, and I was just telling her a minute ago, I'm a big fan, even though she didn't realise it. So let's crack on. As you say at the bottom, when we get started, if you want to just say hello or ask any questions or make any comments, then please do so on below. We're live on LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube, so there shouldn't be too many problems there. And of course, we just hope that the system will be able to handle the demand, because as we know, millions of people tune in from all over the world to watch this show. In fact, you won't know this, Fiona, but I think I've heard on the grapevine that Meghan Markle's quite worried about the competition for her new podcast. So at the end of the day, we're motoring. Look, Joe Rogan only had one person once, so we've got to be positive. We've got to be positive and believe. There's a song there, but don't worry, I'm not going to play it. All right, okay, I'm waffling. I'm not going to waffle anymore. I'm just going to play a quick intro, and then we're going to crack on. Okay, so good morning, and I'm Phil Croshaw, and this is the Journey podcast live. Today, I'm so delighted to be joined by PR expert and guru. Sorry, I embarrassed you, Fiona, but you are, in my eyes, an expert and guru. So, Fiona Scott, very warm welcome to Passions. That's my other show. Very warm welcome to the Journey Live. Please do introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Phil. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your show. Well, thank you for saying that you follow me. That's really kind. I am a journalist for 34 years experience. I've run my own PR business for 15 years next year. And I absolutely love what I do. And it's really simple in my eyes. I'm simply a storyteller. It's just that these days I tell a lot of stories about businesses and business owners and brands, whereas in the past I was employed in television and radio, and I started my career in local newspapers.
Wonderful. Do you know what always intrigues me about these interviews? And I always ask it as a first question, and it's just happened almost like by default over time. And I think this is particularly relevant with what you do. How has PR changed in the last 20 years, or has it?
Right. Yes, it has. Well, what I'd say is the tools have changed. The tools to get your stories out there have changed. There's more opportunity now, not less. But the principles of it haven't changed. In my eyes, PR and journalism is very closely aligned. It's about telling stories and proactively getting your stories out there. It's actually about taking action around your stories and being confident enough to share them. Now, the tools with which you share them are very different now than they were 20, 15 years ago when I started my business. That's the bit that's changed.
So does that mean that it's much more challenging now for businesses to be able to find that, you know, so many routes. It's almost like a tsunami of choices, isn't it? I mean, social media, I'm sure you're no different than the rest of us. You just about get your head around Facebook, and then something called Instagram arrives. You just about get your head around Instagram, and then something called, I'm going to swear now, bloody TikTok arrives. And everybody's talking about TikTok, and everybody's talking about doing video on TikTok and such like. Is that a challenge for people to be able to, because they've got a business to run, in terms of finding the right route to tell the stories?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. There's loads and loads of opportunity now, which is great. But obviously, that means there are a lot more stories. There's a lot more noise. There's a lot more competition. And therefore, you can be very scattered in your approach. I'll try a bit of this. I'll try a bit of that. So how do you deal with that? The best thing to do is have a bit of a plan and a bit of knowledge before you start, and follow that plan, and for a period of time, track back and see if it's working. And then what you do is you add layers to that plan over time as you grow. Trying to be all things to everybody, trying to try a bit of this and a bit of that generally doesn't work. You'll end up feeling dissatisfied. Nothing ever works. I'm here, I'm there, but nobody's seeing. But it's because you've got no consistency. And I think that's the key thing, being consistent somewhere, building it. And I find most business owners who do that will get to a stage where they think, you know, I'm really confident now on YouTube. I think I've got a steady audience there. I'm ready to introduce a new layer, whatever that layer might be. So it might be TikTok, it might be Instagram, it might be, you might go back to Facebook, you might suddenly have got a certain type of client decide to be more active on LinkedIn. But if you are going to be active on something, you've got to be in it for the long game. It isn't, oh, I'll do a few posts for 3 weeks and I'll expect 10 grand to come and shake me by the hand. It doesn't work like that. In all areas of business, frankly, but particularly in the world of public relations.
Yeah, this is something that this is something that gets to me too. It's almost like the instant gratification world. Is it the same then in PR as it is in, say, content marketing that we do a fair bit of? Is it the same in that there's almost that expectation of, if we've not got £10,000 a week on Friday, then it's not worked and it's pointless?
Yeah, I've had so many conversations about that. So the phrase that comes up is return on investment. And I got to be honest now, 15 years in, if I start hearing that in initial conversations, I walk away, because I simply don't get marketing and PR. I did a blog post recently. It was around the saying, I know that advertising, 50% of advertising works, but I don't know which 50%. That phrase is 100 years old, folks. It's 100 years old. So it's always been thus. The only way you can truly measure the effect of any kind of marketing, or in my world, PR activity, is to stop doing everything, and see what happens to your business. Because I haven't known many successful invisible businesses. In 15 years, I think there's one business where I actually said, I can't, they wanted my support, and I said, I cannot actually help you. And the reason was their main contractor was the Ministry of Defence. They worked with a lot of celebrities and were under NDA. So almost everything they did, I couldn't talk about. But what I said was, the thing is, by putting all your eggs in those specific baskets, if the MOD walk away from you, and they would, and they could, and they won't care, you are going to be buggered. You know, I'm quite straight talking, as you can tell. So every business has to be visible. Think of it that way. The choices you make are around how you're going to be visible, and you must be in it for the long game.
Brilliant. I'm glad you mentioned that, because as you know, this is a live stream. This is a podcast, and I know you do podcasting yourself. I've obviously listened to a few of those. Really good. You know, I have conversations a lot with clients now about doing video live streams, doing podcasting, and so on and so forth. But there's still a real nervousness and uncertainty, I think, about it. But one of the things I always ask people is, do you believe that it's important, vitally important, for your business to be seen and heard to succeed? And very few will say, no, it's not important, which is very much linked to what you were saying there. So, I mean, having started to get involved in podcasting yourself, do you actually think that video and audio is going to become more and more and more mainstream in terms of communicating to target audiences?
God, yeah, absolutely. All the stats support that. I believe the stats this year is that 82% of all purchases online will come via video. 82%, that is huge. And you've only got to look, I mean, I'm in my 50s now, so I've got older children. You look at the way they make a purchasing decision. How do they research people? Their celebrities are not who you might think. My son will get really excited about some YouTuber I've never heard of because they've got zillion followers. And this is the generation that's coming through. They are going to be your employees of the future, the entrepreneurs of the future, the buyers of the future. You have to get with the beat. So many people are so fearful. They're fearful of, oh, I look awful. I need to lose 3 stone. I need to look different. What if I say the wrong thing? Well, do you know, you will. Sometimes it's okay because we're human beings and we're not perfect. But the truth is, if you take all those worries and you do nothing, and other people in your sector, whether that's in your geographical community, your competitors do stuff, you are going to become invisible and irrelevant. It's that simple. And so you have to embrace the reality of life. You know, I think in my head, I'm 26 and a curvy size 14 still. Now, I walk past a mirror and I think, who's the old woman who's far too fat and needs to lose 4 stone? And I remind myself it's me. But the reality is I'm not just that thing. I'm a load of things.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
most people who are listening or watching don't care about that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not here as a weight loss coach who's overweight telling you to do something. I mean, that would be a whole different dynamic.
That's the next show, Fiona. That's the next show. But it's true. I get it.
Yeah, you kind of, you know, and some people think, well, it's more Americanized now and we have to be like that, particularly in legal and financial sectors. But the reality is this is the way we're going. Yeah. This is the way our children interact, communicate, and perceive the world. This is the way our grandchildren will do it. And, you know, if you're going to finish business in the next 5 years and you're doing okay and you're doing all right in PR the way you always have done, then fine, I will say nothing. But if you want to be in business longer than maybe 3 to 5 years and certainly 10 years, you've got to get with it now.
Yeah, and of course, the 14-year-old in 10 years is 24, and that 24-year-old is a consumer. They're a worker in the workplace, and that's what they're used to. They don't know any different. So,
and there are loads of reasons to do this. I mean, I work with bigger companies who employ people, and they will do, when they get down to the last 2 people they want to employ, they will do, for instance, an online profile piece of due diligence. And you will, obviously, if your behavior is inappropriate, that will mark you down on social media. But equally, you'll be marked down if you are not there.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever get frustrated at all with, I was going to say false experts then, which sounds a bit derogatory, but I'm just thinking there's a lot of people, and I think probably social media and the internet has created this in a sense, is that, you know, they've read a book, you know, they've done an internment at a company as a marketing assistant, and now they're all of a sudden, I'm shaking your head, so I guess I know where you're going with it. And you kind of say, you know, I'm an expert. Yeah, the one I absolutely love, which is perhaps overly quoted, is the 21-year-old life coach. That's the one I love. So anyway, in terms of the question, is that a frustration you get? Because the barriers to entry in a lot of this stuff, like consultants, coaches, all that kind of thing, is pretty low, isn't it? In some cases, it's basically a laptop and the internet, maybe a website on Squarespace for like £3.50, and you're away.
Yeah, I do think there is that thing of I've helped someone with that little thing. Oh, I've noticed that actually in knowing this little bit of knowledge, I know more than a lot of other people. I'll suddenly be an expert.
Yes.
And actually, do you know, in some cases, I don't mind that, as long as you're honest about where you are in your journey, because it generally is going to be someone behind you. I had an example of this recently that I wrote about. I had a load of marketing guff on Facebook from a woman trying to teach me how to use YouTube. Now, I have a small YouTube channel personally with my husband about our caravan adventures. So I actually know quite a lot about how to use YouTube. So I went off, I thought, I'll just check her out, because actually that could be useful, help us grow our channel.
Yeah.
And I'd done a course with some caravan YouTubes in the USA for $120, which was massively good value for starting out and really helpful. So I looked at this woman and she had 170 videos, all sat on a sofa in the dark. She had 198 subscribers. Now I've got on my YouTube channel, it's modest, but I've got about 840. So I'm 4 times more successful than her. So if I was going to sell anything around YouTube, it would be around starting up, being realistic, what kind of basic kit you'd need. And I would base it on where I am now. I wouldn't pretend to be the fount of all YouTube knowledge, share my stuff. So I think it's about being authentic. In terms of PR, what frustrates me the most actually is PR companies who promise the earth, particularly when it comes to the media and publicity, to small business owners who are spending their hard-earned cash, they're investing in it based on promises that are completely unrealistic and frankly will never happen. That thing will make me absolutely livid, because I know how hard it is to get publicity for a business, and I base my pricing around that. But I just see it all the time. Business owners charge thousands of pounds a month, promise loads and loads of stuff. You'll be in the national press, you'll be this or that. And that really annoys me because PR companies do not control the media. The media makes its own decisions based on the outlet. So please, anyone listening to this or watching this now or anytime in the future, do a bit of due diligence, ask a few basic questions or get some training initially before you go and splurge thousands of pounds on a pipe dream.
Yeah, I think extremely well said. And it is a real it's bordering on scamming in a sense. I guess the only thing I would add to that is there is an element, dare I say, of buyer beware. And I think it's what you just said. It's do your research. You know, if somebody's going to be doing live stream training, check that they've been doing live streaming. You know,
yeah, and check that at least as a minimum, if you're looking to up your game, you've started something like YouTube, like I mentioned, you've started doing it and you want to up your game, then do your research at least that the person offering you the training hasn't got less followers than you, because you could be training them, couldn't you? You know, on my business YouTube, I'm not going to lie to anyone here, I don't focus on it heavily because of all the other stuff I've done. I do, and I'm very busy. So that would be a layer that might come in later. But we do spend a lot of time, Steve and I, doing our personal one, being consistent with our content. And that's where my YouTube energy goes, if you like. But I would just say it is quite easy to do due diligence. It really is. And ask around people in your business community who might have slightly bigger business than you, who outsource for PR. Ask them first who they use and why they use them and what they get in return, before you start, you know, making those serious financial commitments.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I basically, I would echo that 100%. And as you say, especially in the current climate, because it's extremely difficult, isn't it, to figure out just how bad it's going to get. And I know everybody always says about, oh, you know, be positive. And I have a bit of a thing about be positive. And I always use the American accent because I just think it's false, really. I think there's a lot of stuff going on. And it's, for me, and this is a personal view, it's not something I would say is everybody's agrees with, but to me, it's more about resilience and creativity, more than, you know, just be positive for the sake of it, you know. But anyway, that's a completely different conversation. What I was going to ask you about is back in the day, as it were, because I'm the same. I'm like you, walk past the mirror and say, where's that guy, all that guy's hair gone? And where's it? Why is he 3 times bigger than he was 5 years ago or whatever? I do the same thing. And I look back on PR back in the day, and there was a lot around who you knew as much as there was about what you knew was important, but it was, you had the you know, you were friends or acquaintances with people in the media, decision makers, journalists. Is that still quite important? How's that changed?
I would say it is still quite important. but it's not the be all and the end all. At the end of the day, and sadly for journalism, this is going to be more the case, because there are fewer and fewer employed journalists now, and fewer traditional media outlets. They're looking for content, they're looking for stories. But I think if you're within your local community, I always advise people to start locally where they're based. And don't give me that guff of, oh, but I can serve anyone everywhere. No, you're still a human being based in a physical space like Manchester or Swindon, where I am. Start local and get to know your local journalists. Even, I recorded a podcast this week, which will go out in September, with a Southwest journalist. And I asked her what the best way to get in touch with her was. And she actually said, although it'll take a long time because my diary is full, take me out for coffee because I want to go out for coffee and I want to meet you and talk to you. Do you know that's a very traditional way of doing things? Yeah, the contacts book is all, but it works both ways. It's not just for the business owner. As a journalist, your contacts book was everything. I mean, and I remember losing one of mine once. Oh my gosh, I went for a week of panic. I'm losing my contacts book. Of course, now the contacts book looks like this. Okay, it looks like that. But, if a journalist says, I want to go out for coffee with you, it's no different than a valuable business contact saying, let's meet up for a one-to-one. Go for it, because they have access to an audience you could only dream of, frankly, online and offline. And it doesn't even matter if you think that journalist is an utter prat. You have to think about the role that they hold, the publication that they are fronting at that time, and the history of that publication. So if it was, say, in my community, it was Wiltshire Life magazine, it's been going for over 75 years, and if that is the right type of magazine for you and your product, so it'd be lifestyle, luxury, that kind of area, and a journalist or editor from that said, yeah, let's meet for coffee, you'd be foolish not to do it.
I guess it stands out as well a little bit, doesn't it? In a sense that you actually can be, dare I use the word, you can be actually asked to do it. It's too easy to press a button, isn't it, with an email or press a button on a LinkedIn message or whatever. I think people are a little bit startled when they're actually asked to meet up in person, especially after this goddamn pandemic that we've just all been through. So it does stand out. I also think as well, it's about how much effort you're prepared to put in. I think people respect effort nowadays more than before, that you actually bothered to make.
Yeah, I think actually, I would say this across the whole of public relations. The thing is with public relations and marketing, it's not like you put a plug in the wall, you turn a switch, the light comes on. It's not like that. So a lot of people put it down the to-do list because it doesn't have immediate results. But it's so important to build your pipeline of, I always call it opportunities, but opportunities that lead to sales. So you've got to give it commitment and time, and whatever commitment and time you think you need to give it, times it by 3, okay? Because that's what you need to do. And you make the effort, the rewards come later. One sector, I talk about this a lot, is with authors. People who have written a book will often think, oh, I'm going to get loads of people, I'll make loads of sales books, and it's going to be fantastic. And then I say to them, and I realise I'm like pouring a bucket of cold water over them, but I just say to them, a new book is published now every 3 seconds. Think about that for a minute, every 3 seconds. That is a lot of noise to get above. If you don't spend as much time marketing your book as you do writing it, then you'll sell it to your friends and families, and then it will disappear without a trace. You've got to be realistic about these things. The marketing is part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually, hang on a second. Pick this up. I actually produced a book quite a few years ago now. This book, which is quite, available in all good charity shops, about £1. I think you'll get a signed copy for now. But the reason I did it was just for extra credibility. I never for a second planned to actually sell any. Ironically, I did a speech at an event and somebody just happened to find out I did this book. I didn't even tell them. Somebody else told them. And they said, well, can we buy 300 books for everybody that's attending your talk? I nearly had half. I said, I think I've got about 13 in a cupboard somewhere. So I always say, just do it for, just to say that you're a published author, because if you can say you're a published author, it does add to that extra credibility, I think. And, an author, not a pamphlet.
Yeah. I have not, well, a lot of my clients have published books, but what I always say is be realistic. You're in a very crowded place. Why are you doing it? I mean, I've done the first draft of my first book, which is about my first 10 years in business, and my journey. So it's partly vanity project. It's partly marketing tool, because I give a load of talks and things like that. And when I give a talk, I can talk about my services if someone asks, but I don't have stuff to sell. So it's a product, if you like, a physical product, but I want to do it. And I think that's the most important thing. You want to do it. And if it goes well, that's great. And if it doesn't, in a couple of years' time, I might decide to write another one about another aspect of my life. It's all storytelling, and you're quite right, credibility and layers. The journalist, who are they going to consider? The business, interviewing the businessman they've never heard of, never appeared on the internet, has never had any publicity in anything, has never published a book, has never won an award, or the businessman who's done all of those things, because they need to be confident that the person that they are interviewing, whether that you are one of many or it's just about you, is actually credible, actually has the staying power. It's not a fly-by-night here, 1 minute gone the next. And there's a lot of that in business and small business. So, yeah, it builds your credibility.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. You mentioned there about storytelling, actually. And one of the things that I think we all see in the media nowadays, and maybe it's always been like this, you tell me, is just the sensationalist approach to stories. And somebody said to me a few months ago, they had a business, and they said, how can I sensationalize a story about my business so people take notice? Which I thought was a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It's that feeling maybe of pressure, isn't it? To, make it as, you always see it, don't you, in the media? It's like fury as, it always starts, I see that, fury as MP goes for a walk with his dog.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we often call it, I'm not particularly witty, but it's a catchy headline. It's particularly true of the national press, not so much local or regional press. But the thing is, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. If your story's not very strong, you need to know where it sits within the media. The other thing I always say to people is, think about this. The media simply reflects what the public do and what's going on around them. They might be biased in the order of stories they put out and what they choose. So bad news in our society, bad news becomes very public incredibly quickly. It's very easy for journalists to get hold of bad news. And I'll tell you why. The first thing is, something bad happens, it's here almost within seconds somewhere. The second thing is, it'll involve the emergency services, who have to tell journalists what they're doing. That's what we pay our taxes for. And the third thing is, it will often go through a route to publicity very quickly through the courts, the police, things like that. And also, bad news is quite unusual. It's unusual, and journalists will pick up on quirky and unusual. Good news is actually very common, and it will pass under the radar. And as a business owner, once you start to recognize that, how will a journalist know that you've had 50% growth in your turnover in the last year, or you've employed 10 new people, you've moved to new business premises? What do you think they do? Do they sit there and yom and it just comes through the ether to them? No, you have to tell them. Whereas the bad news stories become very evident to them very quickly, because of the routes to market of that bad news. And there's another factor in this. We click on and we read bad news at least 5 or 10 times more than we click on good news stories. There are odd exceptions to that. News stories that suddenly catch the public attention. So Captain Tom Moore during the lockdown was an example of that. But there's loads of space for good news if you actually proactively get it out there. And I often say to people, don't obsess about how you think news should work and how the media should work and the morals of who chooses what story, because you can't influence that. Okay, don't obsess about that. Obsess about the reality we live in and how to make your story visible with the reality we live with. I can assure you journalists talk about this stuff a lot, and they do sometimes disagree with the news editor if you're in broadcast, radio or TV, or the news editor if you're in print journalism, about the weight given to certain stories. They will disagree about that, and sometimes journalists themselves are uncomfortable about the way we tell stories or the way their publication tells stories. But at the end of the day, they will have a paymaster who will say, no, sorry, I disagree with you. And journalists will usually say their piece, and then they will shut up because the paymaster has told them to do it in a certain way. I remember back in my early days, there was a journalist went through a huge phase of doing sensationalist stories about celebrities who were getting divorced. I mean, now it's pretty common, and celebrities will announce it themselves, usually on their social media. But I had to ring this celebrity in my community about him getting divorced. I really, really didn't want to do that. I felt it wasn't any of our business, but I was forced to do it. And he did speak to me. I mean, he said no comment, but he wasn't rude. And years later, I got to meet him and apologize for that, which of course he couldn't remember. And I remember saying to my news editor at the time, I'm not into stories like that. Someone's private life is private life. And unless it comes out into the public domain or it affects a public role, or they are hypocrites, I am not interested in hiding in someone's bushes and talking about their sex life or who they are married to or not married to. That is not the kind of journalism I am interested in. But there are some journalists that do and are interested in that stuff. It doesn't interest me.
Yeah, I know, that's absolutely right. And then you're getting, I suppose, into the news of the world territory. What's your, as it was, what's your views then on print media? Because obviously all the talk now is about internet, as we've said, all the talk's about social media. What's your views about print media? Do you think it's got a future? And I'm not asking you to be Nostradamus, but do you think it's got a future, and how do you think it might develop over the next 10 years or so?
Oh, that is a big question, and we often talk about it. I think print media does have a future, but I think it's going to be different. I do think that we're in Swindon, we have a daily newspaper, and my husband always calls it the pamphlet now. I don't think that in smaller urban areas that a daily newspaper will survive into the future. I think is unsustainable. And already they actually put more of their focus online because they can have really high scoring domain authority news websites. So I don't think that'll happen. I think what you'll find is your niche magazines, so business to business magazines, I don't know, Knitting Today, people who've got a particular interest and niche audience, those things will survive. Maybe local newspapers that are more weekly or monthly in an area. And what I think we will see a continuation of is what I call the uber local, or the parish pump magazines that people have in their very local areas. They're often like A5 size. And they sit in your loo or on your coffee table, and they tell you about events and things that are happening in your very local community. I think as the world gets smaller and we're more connected globally, we will follow the pattern of social media in that we will have silos of interest, if you get my drift. So very local, because I live in the Swindon area, and it's particularly in my case the central western Swindon area. I don't go out to northern Swindon, which is like 20 minutes away very often. You might have that in Manchester. I think the big city newspapers will survive because they're more national in their approach. They cover a much bigger area. So the Manchester Evening News, for example, or the Birmingham Mail, Birmingham Live, the Bristol Post, I think those have a shot. But I think we're in a period of transition as to what the media is these days. I do think we will always have a need for an independent, properly trained journalist who understand the power of the word and who understand the law. Because a lot of people out there are sharing stuff, and I talk about this a lot. You've already touched on it, the self-styled gurus, and we have it with fake news, people who share guff and rubbish, and often stuff that is extremely illegal to say.
How has it changed actually? Has the law changed yet about things like libel and stuff online? I know there was talk about it, about what you could and couldn't say online versus what you couldn't say in print.
Actually, the law of libel has not changed. It's still as relevant, whether online or not.
Right.
But because it's a civil matter, it's a question of whether someone, it's not criminal, so it's a question of whether someone is going to actually take you to court over things that you've said. It is a grey area of law, just as copyright is as well. Exactly, it's still evolving. But from what I can see, and being in the industry, and the police will treat certain things. So if I am threatening to you online, the police will treat that very much as though I've done that to your face. Now, it might not go as far at this stage, but you'll still get a crime number and things. So I think that we have to appreciate and understand that we can all almost be journalists of our own stories now because of the way in which the world has gone. But there are responsibilities that come with that. And there are consequences if your intention is bad. You know, if we do it with good intent and authentically, we should most of the time be okay. We'll always attract some haters and some, you know, scammers, and we have to be aware of that. But we have personal responsibility for how we behave on whatever channel that is. There is a book that I get whenever it's come out in this new iteration, and it's a Bible for journalists. And for bigger companies that really, really want to do a lot of publicity, I always advise their decision makers to get it. You can only get it online. It's called Essential Law for Journalists. But it explains how the law's evolving around all of this, and it will use case studies that have been tested in court. Okay, and there have been some big ones recently. You can look at the whole footballers' wives things between Rebecca Vardy and Wayne Rooney's wife. That whole hideous mess that came out of that. And also, you have to remember, when you put yourself out there on social media these days talking about your stories, you're also making your story then very visible to journalists. So you can't complain if a journalist suddenly runs your story in the local media with no further reference to you, and you can get uppity and think, wow, well, the journalist didn't come to me, but you've already put it out there on Facebook or link. Yesterday I had someone contact me because they were upset. They put something out on TikTok. They'd put it out there, shared whatever story it was, and a local journalist had run that story, seen it, run it on TikTok, probably because of a deadline, hadn't gone back to that person to ask permission, and they felt that that was wrong and illegal. It's not illegal, folks.
Wow, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the law of libel still exists, but TikTok is American-based. So copyright in America has what's called a fair use clause around news. Okay, around news. So a journalist could say, well, you shared that as your news, and I'm using it as fair use because I'm not straying outside of what you said. I am saying where it's come from. So I'm linking back to TikTok and so you have to be careful about these things.
Oh, crikey, yeah.
You have to be careful about these things. I mean, in the real world, I've had it many times. So for example, but when I first went into TV, actually I was in Manchester filming for this, Phil. I did something on bus wars, and it was in the days when Badger Line, now First Group, was literally driving small operators off the road. And this was happening in two places massively, Bristol and Manchester. So what they were doing is they were trying to gobble up small operators to become big. So you'd have your small operator in Bristol city centre going to pick up the 10 past 10 passengers out to another area of Bristol, and a Badger Line bus would come in, literally would be waiting, would come in, take those passengers for free, literally driving those small companies out of business. And I was filming that one day, and I was filming it from the public street, and a bus driver came up and went nuts, and he grabbed the front of the camera like this, and the fascia around the cameraman's camera came off and hit his face and cut his face. Okay, and he tried to take us to court saying we had attacked him. When the police saw that footage, because the camera was rolling, they basically said, actually, the TV company were within the law. They were filming in a public space. They were not using a zoom lens to go into your house or your private space. They filmed something you were actually doing in a public space. You then attacked the cameraman, broke his equipment, so actually they could take you to court. So, you know, people's view of what is allowed within the law is very odd. And their view around privacy and what is private and what is not is also very odd. If you are sharing something on social media, you have to be prepared for the fact you are sharing it with the world.
Amazing. Brilliant. I've got a question here for you, actually, from
Yeah.
Emma.
Yeah.
And Emma's just saying that she wants to go into journalism, but she's trying to think about the best way to go about it and what type of journalism to do. Do you have any recommendations?
Oh my gosh, I need to know a lot more about what interests her most. Most journalists will have a degree these days, not always, but it's quite rare not to. I would always advise a degree in a pure subject. I did English and history, and then take a postgrad for a year in journalism, because you get really concentrated, really good work experience opportunities. So my understanding, the good ones are Falmouth Uni, do a postgrad, Cardiff, and also Leeds. But the key thing is write stories now. Get your McNay's Essential Law for Journalists, the latest edition, via that online site that we buy books from, and read it. And I am not a textbook reader, but it's an easy read, and start to understand the law around what you can't say and tell stories yourself. Do it through a blog, create a blog, because it's a really competitive game. There are fewer opportunities now. So the more proactive you are, and it was competitive when I joined in the 80s, when I went for my first traineeship on a local weekly paper in Somerset. When I turned up, I was one of 300 people being tested, and that was in the late 80s. So, you know, it's a competitive game. You'll stay in power, and your enthusiasm is, at the end of the day, that's what's going to carry you through. So sorry to be a bit vague, but
no, it's obviously a vague question. I mean, one of the things that I saw a few months ago, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, was what in effect was termed as video journalism, where people now were actually becoming the whole package in the journalistic process. In other words, they had an iPhone in the hand, they would write the script, they'd put a mini teleprompter on the screen, they'd deliver it whilst they were out and about, and then they'd go back to their iPad, edit it in the car, and then produce it. So it's almost like, you know, the camera person, the sound person, the presenter, all in one, which I thought was a fascinating concept. Do you see that as being something that could grow? Because I imagine in cost terms to a media outlet, if somebody's got all those skills, it must be significantly less expensive.
Well, that's been happening for years and years.
Right.
And in TV, it's been happening. They're called self-shooters. And yes, that is an attractive skill set. The problem with that is, though, it means one story takes them that amount of time.
Oh yeah,
okay,
yeah, of course.
So whereas if you have a journalist, you have a crew on the ground, you might be able to get through 3 stories a day, send the rushes back, and an editor's working on them. You know, if you are a one-man or one-woman band doing all of that, you can really only do 1 story a day. So your productivity could drop. But actually, a lot of us do that. If you're a YouTuber, you're going to be doing that anyway. So in that, I see both opportunity and problems. I do remember once, a few years ago, being asked to produce a program. It was for a big TV company. And the reason I turned the job down was they wanted me to be in the studio in Plymouth, which meant I'd have to live down there, and I didn't want to. But what they'd done is they'd employed self-shooters, hadn't briefed them properly. All the the video had come back and it was all wrong. And when you edit produce, that means you assemble all the footage and put it together to create a series. That footage didn't match the brief, what they'd been commissioned to do. So they ended up having to pay for it twice. Right. So the key thing about that is you've got to have it clearly in the upfront contract at the beginning of the project, ensure that the 10 people, whereas in the past that would have been 30 people, the 10 people working on that product know exactly what's required of them. Otherwise, you'll end up spending more money, not less. So both benefits and advantages and disadvantages to that.
Is journalism still very popular as a choice of topic, a subject, I suppose I should say, in universities and colleges, Fiona? Would you know that?
I have an idea of that. I do give some lectures. I've done some at the University of Gloucestershire. I've done some at various other universities. Yes, there is still a real appetite. There are natural born journalists, which I believe I am, and others are. There is still a huge appetite. It's very competitive. You'll soon know if it isn't, because universities will drop those courses like a stone. But what you do find is they're much more crossover. So it might be that you can specialize, you can do a year where it's very general about journalism and specialize in broadcast, radio, PR. They're very aligned disciplines. It's still very popular. It's incredibly competitive. It's much more freelance. It's much more of a gig economy. So think of it as being an actor these days. It's that kind of thing. It's not an easy industry to be in, but if you can nail it, and if you're authentic and you're passionate and you're a decent writer or a decent script writer, you'll be fine.
Right, brilliant. How important, I'm just thinking about skills or natural skills, I suppose. There's obviously skills you can learn, but I'm thinking the one that jumps out at me, which I think I've got a huge amount of, which is what drives me in doing all these podcasts over the years, is curiosity. Would you say you have natural curiosity, and is that a really key thing to have?
Yeah, you've got to be a nosy Parker.
Yeah, a nosy sod, as my wife says.
It's two things: being nosy, curious, and interested in people, no matter who that person is. It could be your neighbour, it could be a homeless man or woman in the street, it could be an MP, it could be a CEO of a company. Being genuinely curious, and when you meet them, being present with them and listening to them and wanting to tell their stories. And people can pick that up really quickly. And you'll know if you're a natural journalist, because people will tell you their stories almost unbidden. It used to be a standing joke in my family when I was a kid, looking back now, that I would attract the nutter on the bus. That was one thing. or I was the Marge Proops of my age, because people would come up and tell me their problems. So the spiritual side of me thinks it's actually about energy and your energy speaking to, but actually curiosity, nosiness. If you're the person that always got to look in the window to see what someone's got in their house, then you have the makings of a journalist. And you're quite right. You can learn the skills and the discipline of it. That is a skill and a discipline. I am not a detailed person naturally. I'm a sort of big picture thinker. I'm very sociable. Knuckling down and doing the writing is not my natural way of being. However, the discipline of the industry has taught me that. And I recognize that. So if you are that person and being around other people and being curious about it, then yeah, you're a natural storyteller or journalist.
It kind of almost seems almost prerequisite in a sense. And certainly when it comes to podcasting and video type interviewing stuff, is you have to have a genuine interest in the people's stories. You have to have a general interest. I mean, I always aim to get at least 3 or 4 takeaways from every interview I ever do. And I do, and this again is no exception. I get all these takeaways. It's a wonderful thing to do. I absolutely love it. But I know I'm just naturally curious about people's stories and their journeys, of course, which is, don't know if that's why I called it The Journey. Maybe that was subconscious. I don't know. The podcast journey, The Journey. Just because it is a journey, isn't it? You know, it's very much a journey in our work and whatever. Just going back for a minute to the PR side of things. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about PR in the context of marketing and promotion and that kind of thing. We're at a time now where people are really struggling to be able to recruit people. how imperative is it then that the, shall we say, slightly larger organizations understand the importance of PR in terms of attracting people who want to work for them?
Really important. And actually, I'm in conversation now with an incredibly big employer, global employer, who has never done any PR. And it is this reason that they're now looking at it.
Right.
Because obviously I can't go into detail, but their routes to market are quite limited. And they've got all those contacts, but suddenly they've got a massive problem with recruitment, massive. And the reason it's important is, one, it makes you stand out in your community. So you can physically be physically visible to people as an employer. Two, it will make you stand out in your sector. So if you want more senior people, not people in startup, you know, if they're reading, I don't know if it's in construction news regularly, because they're a senior, I don't know, quantity surveyor or something, they're likely to see your content and likely to see that you're recruiting, or be interested and go onto your LinkedIn and see that you're recruiting, whatever. The third thing, and the thing that I often people would call it the woo-woo or the pink or fluffy bit, but it's really important. They'll see that you're a caring employer, that you're ethical, that you're purposeful, that you give back to your community. And all the evidence shows that the generation behind me and the generation Z behind them will put far more emphasis on being green and sustainable. Are you a caring and ethical employer? Do you give back to your community? Do you do stuff for charity? Do you offer me things that go beyond salary? You know, flexible working opportunities, career progression. And how are you going to say that? You have to demonstrate that in a way over time that's positive and consistent, rather than just quack in the words a job interview. Because, you know, a job interview, we're not stupid people. A job interview, nobody says at a job interview, have you worked with us? We're pretty average company. We don't give much of a bollocks about our employees. And yeah, and if you let us down, we're going to do this, that, and the other. And no, you don't get any bonuses, and you're meant to work 24/7. Nobody says that in a job interview. We're all going to say we're great. But how to really cement that is consistently sharing those stories over time. And that requires investment and time, and recognizing the value of the stories within the business, particularly the bigger the organization you run or are part of.
Yeah, Joe, I think that's absolutely fascinating. Okay, Fiona, well, we're coming to the end. I thought I'd really enjoy this, and I have really enjoyed this, and I've got a number of takeaways from it, and it's lovely to meet you finally. And that's why we should put a shout out to our good friend Taz Thornton for getting us together, as it were. So tell us how people get hold of you, how people speak to you, website, any other routes to speak to you, all the 4,000 ways nowadays.
Journalists and me, we sit on Twitter a lot. So free PR tip for nothing. If you want to contact with journalists, be on Twitter at the Fiona Scott. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you there if you want to find me on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook group called Fiona Scott's PR Tribe, which is free to join. And I do share a lot of value and content there. Just to be clear, I sell my stuff there, okay? But I do give a lot of added value. I've got a podcast available in all the usual places, which obviously is totally free and open. It's called PR Not BS with Fiona Scott. That's been going for a year. And I have a website, which is scottmedia.uk. And if you want to connect with me, start with the Power Hour. Invest in 1 hour only, okay? So that you get at least an honest assessment of what you want or what you want to achieve by someone who's done it for a long time and knows, before you go off and actually put plans into place. Because the one thing I don't want you to, and I genuinely mean this, is I don't want you to spend thousands of pounds on a load of old crap.
And it's not difficult to do. And actually, I think you need to add to all that. I think you need to add your YouTube caravan channel. This is a big thing now, isn't it? It really is. People traveling around in vans and 4x4s and caravans, and people love it, don't they?
Yeah. And I think it's grown something like 30% since lockdown.
It doesn't surprise me.
Oh yeah, we've been doing it for 10 years this year. The YouTube channel, and it's raw. I have to warn you, you will get me with hair like this the first thing in the morning. It's called Beyond That Blue Door, and there is a film describing why we call it that. It's me and my husband, Steve. And it's, I was very disappointed a few weeks ago. So we shared a nice film about badgers coming into our awning and pinching our stuff. And I thought, I'll get loads of views for that. And then Steve did a film about how to sand down the toe ball of your car. And I get 200 views and he gets 900 views. So, the caravanning world is crazy, male dominated, and they like their gadgets. So, yeah.
Fiona, I blame the algorithm if I were you, Fiona.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's true though. People do love the how-to stuff, don't they? I'm obviously into the cameras and microphones and all the techie geeky stuff, and those are the sorts of channels that get huge volume of views. And I've seen a number of people actually on these who run these channels saying that whenever they put something like an evaluation of the newest mic from Shure or whatever, it gets thousands of views, and then they do something a bit more creative, vloggy, and it doesn't get anywhere near as many. It's weird.
No. Steve and I have a mini competition, but you'll see that he's spreadsheet man, so he's very detailed. So you'll see us arguing about that quite a lot. It is real. We've kept it very real.
Arguing's a good one. Arguing's going to definitely bring in the punters, if you ask me. Authenticity and all that. Yeah. Fiona, thanks ever so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. All the very, very best. I'm sure I'll see you on the road, as Mad Max once said. Just a quick mention, actually. I've just managed to get agreement from two guys called Sammy and Courtney, and they're called Grey Skits, and they're on TikTok, and they've gone from 0 followers to 2.2 million followers in probably a space of about 18 months or something ridiculous. And I'm going to be interviewing them on the 15th of September. I don't normally mention this on shows, but I think this is worth a mention. I think it's there or thereabouts about the 100th live interview I've done. So it's a special 100. But more importantly, it's going to be an old guy like me talking to 21-year-olds about TikTok. Now, that could be a very, very interesting experience for anybody as they try and explain to me how they've managed to do this. So it's very much linked to what you were saying, Fiona, about Gen Z and how they're consuming information differently and how they're relating to information differently and news differently. So I'm really looking forward to interviewing them, and hopefully we'll be able to find a middle ground with their Gen Z language and my Gen old as hell language, and hopefully we'll find somewhere to come between. So that's it for today. Very, very hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Fiona, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you again very soon on the Journey Podcast Live. Thanks for coming in, and I do appreciate your time because I know how valuable it is. So thank you very much indeed. Bye for now.